As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have an important first-time guest tonight, Wade Hodges, founder and CEO of Nevada Exploration, is here with us on Reluctant Preppers. He runs a very unconventional enterprise because we've talked a lot about with gold bullion dealers. We've talked with some people who talk about gold storage. We've talked about experts in the gold markets, talking about the realities of supply and demand globally for gold. But Wade is on a very different and interesting, exciting part of the business. He's an explorer and a discoverer. Wade is moving frontiers forward in the technology and the techniques for improving how new gold can be discovered. Wade, thank you for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
Absolutely, Dunnigan. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for taking the time to listen.
And I noticed from your background that you've been in the business for some time, and I heard in earlier interviews you gave that your dad even set up expectations for you about the way that you set goals and the way that you press forward. If you could give us a little bit of a background briefly so our audience knows, where are you coming from, both from a mindset and also from a subject matter expertise? What makes you an expert in the area of gold discovery?
Oh, golly. You mentioned my dad. I was just, he's still alive. We're still very much in touch, and I still very much value his advice. He came before a lot of modern theories on how to be, and I just find it so amazing that from his background of basically hard work and paying attention, that he could verbalize so many of the things I see now that the experts are talking about. Basically, make promises was his biggest advice to me as I went out into the world, and I thought for a moment that, gosh, that's easy as can be to do. Anyone can make promises. But there was a pregnant pause, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, and then keep them. And I would love for people today, as we talk to, we're in a political season. I would love for these various candidates and people that we're trying to choose as leaders spend 15 minutes talking about what the word integrity means, and trying to imagine a world, as I do, where, gosh, it'd be so easy if people would just say what it is they want and then make a promise, because we're pushing into the unknown. We don't really know, what's going to happen, and then do everything they can to keep it. So that's where I grew up. That's where I've come from, and I've been grew up, around the fringes of the farming communities, as well as suburban areas of Corrales, Oregon, actually. And so my family was all involved in logging and agriculture, ranching. My dad was a butcher. My first job in life was a gut boy at the slaughterhouse. And so I always wanted to find something I could make my own within that family environment. And one of the things was rocks, looking at mining as an endeavor to go into, to where I could kind of, find my own identity. And so I was always early on fascinated in where mountains came from. It's always been just a draw, and then realizing that fundamentally the natural resources that all these other elements in life draw from come from mineral deposits in various forms. And then that got me into working on a master's degree at Oregon State University, and that took me at a time when gold was high on everybody's mind because it was becoming available to be basically freely traded. It was no longer controlled, artificially fixed by government entities. And it just seemed to me to be a logical place to focus my attentions is on a metal that people want for no particular reason. I mean, it's really based on human emotions. People want it. They've always wanted it. They always will want it. It's got certainly a lot of physical properties that make it of interest, which is some of the reasons that people want it. But primarily it is a store of value, and it just made a lot of sense to me maybe ironically, that from a kind of a rational perspective, scientific inquiry, that I would decide to look for something that was based basically on human emotion.
And you mentioned in one of the other interviews that I heard you say that in some ways you're living out a Hardy Boys fantasy of discovery and adventure, and when your heart's really there, yeah.
Totally. I mean, one way to look at it is I've never grown up. You're listening to a kid. I grew up in mystery stories and treasure hunting, and all I've ever done is follow the clues to lead to a goal. And you try to pick the goal to be big enough, because one of the things I hate to do is get to the end, become really good at something, and then have to start over. And you're bored now looking around. And so for me, it was, well, why don't we go out, instead of finding a treasure that somebody buried and all this kind of thing, why don't we just find where the treasure came from initially? Mother Nature is probably easier to deal with than where people hide things, looking for sunken treasure and such. And let's just set our sights on that. And in the process, I've come to cross all kinds of other gold, if you will, along the trail. The search for gold has given to the unintended consequences of learning about the ice ages, about climates in the past, about how our planet has come to be and where it is and what's important about it, and how the environment is very delicate. It's just an amazing process of opening your eyes. And so I basically have lived that adventure for my entire life. And it's really cool when the things you're doing, the things you like to do, you listen to your mentors, you pay attention to people who have come before you. They tell you, if you do this, this is what you should expect. And when that happens, and you find a gold deposit where there was nothing before, there were just rocks, and nobody understood that. It's like Columbus going out and finding a place that he might have seen in his mind, but then actually setting foot on it. You get a feeling that you can't, it's very hard to put into words, to explain to somebody. And then when you do it again, and then you keep working at it, and then you see it happen again, and you do it again and again for 9 times, and then you look behind a trail of 30 million ounces that you brought into the world that no one knew existed before, and then you see the jobs, in other words, the unintended consequences that came from those discoveries, the mines that were formed, the tinsmiths that were put to work, the welders, the pipe fitters, the environmentalists, for crying out loud, the people that keep the whole thing in balance, is all sourced from basically that cornucopia, that discovery, that eureka moment.
And you mentioned along the way that while mining for minerals, you mined up a lot of other information and knowledge that's crossing over into other spheres. And we'll get to those in a minute. But I wanted, because of my multifaceted background of scientific degree, engineering, years of engineering, process engineering, and project management, and wanted to see if we could look at the unique adventure that you're on and the venture of your enterprise through those different lenses to really help people understand why gold is unique, why the role that you're playing in the discovery of it, and the capability of how humans can discover more gold and lower the cost of producing it, and then how that turns around and pays back to how you leave the campsite better than you found it, in a sense that you mentioned, creating jobs, that sort of thing, but how it creates wealth for not only the miners that would follow after you and develop those projects, but those who would partake in, be participating either in your venture or in those ventures, and how you're an entrepreneur creating value. So if we could start it way back at the beginning, the fundamentals, like you said, the fascination. I remember reading somewhere that every child is born a scientist as long as somebody doesn't talk them out of it or not give them the opportunity to naturally experiment. Every baby,
like that, yeah.
Just look at a baby, they're experimenting with everything that they do. They learn how about balance and touch and cause and effect and everything. So as a scientist, why, and I remember this just hit me like a bolt when I was in chemistry class in 10th grade, so I won't tell you what it was unless yours is the same. But what is it that makes gold unique among all of creation? What are the factors that make gold so different from everything else?
Well, we can look up Wikipedia. We've all heard people talk about the unique properties of gold. But for me, I go back through time, through history, to when we first, swung out of the trees and we've landed in a savanna somewhere, looking around, scavenging off of whatever food there is to eat. And I got to imagine that it's a pretty drab, pretty gray, pretty brutal world. And it's, the men go out because they can lift the biggest clubs, and they do their best to come back with something to eat. And hi, honey, I'm home. Scenes are acted out around the ring of fire. And, the wife has to try to feed the kids with whatever came in. And somewhere in this world, somebody found this fleck of gold, gold nugget, something you put your hands on, and it was totally different. It was heavy. Okay, it's shiny, and it stays shiny. You can pound it. You can make it into all sorts of jewelry, and it's just fun. You just hold a Kruger. Anybody that's ever had the experience of holding an ounce of gold, I think, understands that feeling, and that's really all it is. I mean, to me, that's the most unique quality of gold, and of course, where men might look at it and say, yeah, well, it's gold. So what? What can I do with it? I can't eat it. It's too heavy to put into a big ball and throw it anywhere, maybe a shot put or something. What can I do with it? Well, it's the women of the world that I think really do exercise tremendous control, in spite of what people say it's a man's world, only to the extent that women are really helping to guide what goes on. Some woman somewhere in my mind, my view of reality, thought that they really liked this stuff and they wanted more. And they talked the guys into going out, cutting down forests, building ships, putting together a crew, provisioning it, sailing outside of land to look for more of this stuff and to bring it back. In the process, they learned how to navigate. They found continents. They found other cultures, and on and on. They found copper. They found oil, natural gas, all kinds of things. And we're still involved in that same process today.
One of the things that jumped out at me in that chemistry class was when we were talking about the electron energy of different elements and how some of them are out there always trying to connect up with trying to react, trying to form compounds so they get more stable.
Yep.
But gold stuck out in my, I zeroed in on that one because it was like it had negative energy in that sense. It actually repelled being connected with anything else. It was so stable that if you tried to do something to it, it wanted to go back to that the natural course for it was to go back to its pure state. It's funny because you started the whole conversation talking about integrity, and that's always something I've noticed about it. So gold has like more integrity than any other element.
Yeah, you're totally right. It clumps together. It will clump together, and there are things that help it to grow, but it likes to find its own space, and it adds other atoms of itself to that place, and you can actually then get nuggets, and that's really what the where the story then begins. Well, how does gold form into clumps, and why is it unique in this place and not there?
Yeah, could you take us to the very beginning just briefly, and where does gold even come from? Because that's another shocker.
Well, I mean, you're looking at if people watch How the Earth Was Made. It's a series on, it's still out there on YouTube and so on. There's one of the episodes, America's Gold, and they do a very good job of covering the high points. And you can talk about, right out in space. I mean, everything comes from some supernova somewhere, and people kind of have a problem with some of those things. It happens nanoseconds after these big bangs and so on. But it's, blasted out into the universe, and everything starts to cool down. It's basically light that's cooling, and it forms matter and all sorts of, we understand how atomic theories works, nucleuses, electrons running around in orbits. And so basically, I mean, the Earth around us, there are all these trace, all these elements. Gold is everywhere around us in the Earth. And it's, accumulated from dust and you end up with gravity forming in big clots and now revolve around the sun. And so, we need to continue the story as to how you get these minute particles of gold to come together. And so you realize that the Earth is unique. It's got a molten core. It's very dynamic. It's constantly changing. It's amazing when you put the perspective that we live on a very thin crust. We talk about our atmosphere being thin and delicate. Well, that crust, we're just a mile or so from being burned to death. It's like walking on top of a volcanic lava flow or something, and this crust breaks through, and then so that engine down there of this very, very hot molten rock. And then what happens is you watch the processes of this molten rock moves towards the surface, and it cools. And so in that process of cooling separates all these different elements into different constituents. A rock, we have igneous rocks. I think maybe your listeners are familiar with volcanic rocks. A volcano is something you see, molten rock. Well, underneath that volcano, because you don't see, it doesn't get to the surface, that's an igneous rock. It's the place that produces the volcanic rocks. So it's a molten body of melted rock, and when it gets to the surface, the pressure changes, the temperature changes, and all this molten rock starts to separate into different phases. There's solid, liquid, there's gas, and as these elements cool in close proximity to each other, they start to form together. They clump together. As you mentioned, gold is one that doesn't clump. And so gold isn't really part of that story until way late. What's happening is calcium, magnesium, iron, potassium, sodium are all clumping together with different amounts of silicon, oxygen, and so on. These elements then combine to make separate minerals. And so you end up with quartz, feldspars, and fancy geological names for separate minerals. You pick up a rock, it's speckled, it has different colors. Each of those little colors relates to some particular mineral. It consists of some unique concentration of elements. Well, gold doesn't really doesn't become part of any of those minerals. It stays, it's pushed away, pushed away, pushed away. And it's that pushing away process that pushes gold and concentrates it in whatever's left over. And that residue might be more of a liquid now. And that liquid generally is characterized by a whole lot of other elements that also don't like to form common rock-forming minerals. And that happens to be all of the trace metals, the tin, the tungsten, the antimony, the arsenic, the mercury, the things that make a lot of our industrial processes very unique.
And I think that's starting to lead us as a clue in this mystery story into how you're able to discover where gold is even when you can't see it. And but before we let you get to that, if you could just answer one basic question that a lot of people might have is, okay, we said the gold was born in outer space in supernovas and in stars. Well, what the heck? So it finally ends up on Earth. Is there any way that we can actually make more of it here on Earth in any kind of commercial sense?
Not that I'm aware of current science is able to do, because basically what you're talking about is extraordinarily high energy to tear apart at the atomic level and to put back together basically the atomic building blocks of an element. You're talking, neutrons, protons, electrons, and the forces that hold those things together are the subject of cyclotrons, atom smashing experiments, and so on. And as far as I'm aware, there's no way to transmutate, lead, doing alchemy or something,
right,
into another element. Unless, of course, you when you're talking radioactive elements, the K products of, radioactive atomic reactions, then yeah, there are byproducts produced, but gold isn't really one of them.
So the amount of gold that's on Earth is fairly fixed then, and how the clues that it leaves by the way that it's gathered together in these deposits, you've pioneered new groundbreaking techniques on how you can dramatically increase the yield of people's exploration for that, and your ability to find it has through your new techniques has really pushed that forward.
Everybody wants to find gold. Again, there's things you can do besides sail ships around the continents and look around and see if the natives have it and then take it from them. I mean, they get it from somewhere. And human history has been a process of trying to understand where does the gold come from. And they trace it back into the mountains. The mountains stick up. They can in full view. People can hike around, look at them. In the early days in the development of our own country, people are fairly familiar with the 49ers, the story of gold being discovered in California, in a place where nobody in the world up to that time ever imagined that the western U.S. had any value at all associated with it. The conquistadors, the Spanish that have first landed in Central America, South America, were looking for gold. Okay, they had two kinds of people on those ships, missionaries and mercenaries. The mercenaries are looking for gold to take back to the big country, their home country, to trot around and get the things that it could get. And, of course, the missionaries looking to save souls. Well, they found the gold. They followed it to where the Indians had found it. and they began to understand that it came from these mountains. Well, those same people that were at that time experts in where gold came from, they were basically the geologists of the day or the astronauts that landed on a foreign world looking for mineral resources, pushed up into the southwestern U.S. and they found nothing. And they knew there was no gold there because the Indians had no gold. And they said, there's nothing here of any value, and they backed away. Well, up until 1849, in Sutter's Mill, Marshall discovery, so on, there's a chunk of gold. And that led then to where did it come from? And so new technology had to be created because what they were seeing is gold nuggets in stream beds.
Okay.
And what did they do? They used a gold pan. They didn't have gold metal detectors or things that we might use today, but they just had a gold pan that was based on the notion, the scientific principle that you can gravity constant. Gold is very much heavier than the rock fragments of a similar size around it. If you shake it and wiggle it, the light stuff floats to the surface, the gold floats to the bottom or sinks to the bottom, and you can concentrate the gold with gravity separation in pans. You can repeat this measurement over and over as you work your way around a stream. Streams flow downhill, and you can follow the trail of gold nuggets uphill until the stream bed no longer produces any gold when you pan it. And then they stop and they say, well, is that it? That's it? Where does the gold come? We still don't know where the gold came from.
Uh-huh.
So they start looking around and they dig down and they find it in the bedrock. And it's covered now by soil. It's a different medium. It's a different environment. They need it once again to come up with new tools and technology to try to figure out where that gold is and how it's formed. So in California Gold Rush, they pulled out, the number, 50 to 100 million ounces of gold. It's an insane amount. Well, they took out that much, a little bit more in form of lode gold, they call it, because it's actually now gold that occurs in slightly smaller amounts. It's not as big as some of the nuggets, but in smaller amounts inside quartz veins that are themselves deposited within cracks in the bedrock. And so that developed all sorts of mining techniques, and a whole genre of people got together on how do you pull the rock out of the earth to then pound it down to make it fine enough to liberate the gold fragments, to then once again concentrate with a gold pan, and so on it went. Well, once that process had been finished, people were that had come to the gold rush, because it seemed to be, the media got involved, talking about how easy it is for everybody to get gold. And so many people from the East Coast, perfectly, rational, responsible people, bought into this, and they left their farms behind, their family and their businesses to take a shot on grabbing the gold ring, and went to California. And most of them didn't find it. It's not as easy as they thought. And they stayed. And so they went on into the rest of the western U.S., and they took what they learned in mining in California, and sure enough, they found hard rock deposits, although they were a little different. The characteristics and detail were different, and we end up with another body of clues. We start to see that we can have different kinds of gold deposits based on what the rocks look like. And that led to more discoveries, the Comstock Lode, Virginia City, Nevada, just outside of Reno, the Oatman District, in Arizona, all sorts of other mineral districts were then discovered, and not just gold. Okay, so again, unintended consequences. And it became the history of the West as more people flooded in. Well, that process has stopped until about 1960. It pretty well run its course. And once again, everybody thought, okay, we're out of gold. There's no more gold to be found. Supply-demand relationships come into play. The price is going to continue to go up because people still want it. It's just that we're not finding as much, so there's kind of a hiatus in discoveries. And then in 1960, John Livermore, working for Newmont, just the early version of Newmont at the time, made some observations, hiking around looking at rocks, scientist being curious, following clues, and he found some very fine grain gold associated with some rocks that nobody had ever expected to be associated with gold. It wasn't quartz vein, it wasn't the normal occurrence, and that caught his attention, his curiosity. He focused on it, and what resulted from that line of investigation was these kind of deposits we call Carlin-type deposits, named for the town in Nevada near this initial discovery. And those that group of characteristics has now been refined. Many good people have studied it. Again, everybody wants to know, where did it come from, why, how did it get there, what is it telling us? And that's where really we are in about 1980. We started to see a dramatic increase in the discoveries of gold. Nevada started there and climbed to become what it is today, which is has the highest concentration of multi-million-ounce gold deposits per unit area of any place on the planet.
Fascinating.
And many, many people do not understand that about Nevada. They drive to Nevada,
it's a silver state.
It's desert. Yeah, it's a silver state, a bunch of ghost towns. BLM owns all this sagebrush, and there's battles with ranchers over what to do about it. It's about what, most people understand about Nevada. But I'm explaining to you, hear it now if you haven't heard it before, but if you're spinning a globe, of representation of the Earth, and you're looking for a spot that has the best odds of finding another big gold deposit, not a little one. I mean, who wants this, you might as well find a big one. I mean, I'm talking 2 million ounces, 5 million ounces, 10 million ounces in one concentrated area. That's the goal. And Nevada has more of those per unit area than any place else. Now, China produces a lot of gold. Russia produces gold. Australia produces gold. Brazil produces gold. But the point that we're making is that if you, as somebody that's trying to find gold, would you rather look over something the size of Russia to find a gold deposit, or would you rather look over something the size of Nevada, which is just a state? It's not even a country.
And part of that plays into the economics of the whole thing, too. Our viewers maybe have heard me tell the story of when we were traveling in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and we were touring a abandoned historical gold mine in the town of Keystone, and the tour guide said to us during the tour, she said, actually, right across the street from us, you probably noticed when you were coming in, is a idle commercial gold mine. They had to stop production because the cost of out in the market, the price that's able to support for gold currently is prohibitive. It's not even worth their methods of digging up out of the ground here. And it didn't strike me at that time that I should have been hearing what she was saying, is the price of gold is so low, it would have been a good time to buy gold and buy gold miners.
It's hugely important. People need to understand that it's not the price of gold and it's not the ounces of gold. That's really important. All gold deposits are characterized by two things, two numbers: the grade, the ounces per ton, if you will, or the grams per metric ton. Okay, the grade is one expression, but the other one is how many tons. Now, every prospector, anybody that's associated with gold, has a gold nugget, on a gold chain hanging around their neck. Okay, and they're talking about, wow, and they're trying to get people excited and interested. That's simple to do. The question that I always have is, well, how many tons does it represent? If it's 1 ounce per ton over 1 ton, that's not a big deal. Okay? If it's 1 ounce per ton over 1 million tons or 100 million tons, okay, now you got my attention. And so that's where the geologist, that's where you need somebody that's able to understand how do you extrapolate ounces per ton, a hand sample, a piece of rock with some gold in it. How do you extrapolate what you see there over a large volume? And that's where you need to understand something about the way the rocks form, the layers, intrusive activities, what's happened to the rocks, how they've been broken, what are the faults going on. And that's where most people just roll their eyes and go, man, I don't have time to listen to all this. And so that's where then people can step in, present themselves as experts. And to any expert, you want to ask them, you say, I'd love the time to say, have someone say, okay, Mr. Hodges, you say you found a gold deposit. Okay, I want to hear that story. And I can tell the story, and they'll go, wow, that's pretty old. How about it? And I've done it more than once. Well, how is that possible? Most geologists that present, represent they can find more gold haven't even found one. Okay, they make maps, they create samples, they drill holes, they do the things that are all part of the process. But how many can have, because that's a hard thing to do. How do you actually go about doing that?
So part of the payoff potentially of your what you bring to this whole economy is important for people to understand. You are not involved in the mining and the production, the cranking out of turning tons and tons of rock into ounces of gold. You are on the discovery side of that. But the results of how well you do what you do will dramatically impact the cost at which the producers will be able to produce gold, and it'll affect their profits. It'll affect the shareholders' profits. It'll affect availability of gold as a resource. So
precisely.
So on those frontiers, you're already changing the world by pushing the capability of the human race is to be able to do what we've never done before in the way that you're doing it. So if you could just give us a little insight into what the impact of that is when you discover the clues and the traces that lead you to understand that this is where the gold is specifically located, then what happens next after you've identified a discovery like that? What happens next?
Well, see, just what you touched on is entirely correct. When most people think of a gold mine, they think of a gold bar, and then they understand there's something about a process that's involved, and it involves conveyor belts and blasting and big earth-moving equipment, and so big companies, and that's basically the thought process. Well, people need to understand that there's a lot of companies out there that can develop and produce gold. It's an engineering. I mean, you're a project manager kind of person. You can pull off a template. It's been done before in multiple places. The metallurgy might be a little different, but you size your equipment relative to the kind of the deposits you've got, and you adjust a few things, okay? And then you get busy to try to keep your costs as low as possible in a business that you do not get to control the price of your product. You're not making shoes, and you can say, our costs went up, we're going to increase the price of our shoes because people want it. No. And that it's very unique. Gold mining, gold development and production, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the toughest businesses in the world. And I know that most of your listeners are not going to like that because they see the gold and that's what they understand. But you look at the value proposition associated with a share price of Barrick or Newmont, and it might go from X to X. Well, you're talking 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. Okay, those are the kind of multiples. And then you get, treated to, cost overruns, the cost of energy went up, it's tougher to make a profit, because people lose sight of the fact that whatever the gold mine that you found is, you have to subtract a whole bunch of costs of getting it out, of turning it into the thing that people want, because people don't just want a rock that has a piece of paper that says there's gold in there somewhere. And so that process is hugely expensive, and so that adds more complexity. So as far as I'm concerned, trying to be an investor to look on the outside of which one of these big producers is going to be the best investment when they've got mines all over the world and all kinds of experts and people doing things, you really are focused on just what's the price of gold going to do. Well, for me, from my point of view, I think of a gold mine. I think of that eureka, I found it moment. The Old West, the prospector, the mule guy, the guy that goes up to the outcrop, picks up a rock and says, "Oh my gosh, I found the gold deposit." That all the rest of this stuff comes from. These problems then begin. Well, if you look at the modern history, what you find is we've gotten better at developing and producing, but we've also got better at exploring and then discovering. And the two are two separate businesses. The mindset, the people, the money, the processes, what you do as an explorer and discoverer are very different than what you do as a developer and producer. There's lots of developers and producers that eventually they run out of gold. And you can easily predict what you're going to find at the history of this gold mine because you start with a known resource. Now, you may find some more, but you're not going to find 10 times as much. It's very unlikely. But with a discovery, if you find something brand new in an area that no one's ever looked before, that eureka, I've discovered it moment is real, and that's where you get the insane profit potential, the 1,000 times your money invested. Because you're now dealing with a supply-demand curve because it's a different business, slightly different than the one for gold production, development and production. Because there's tons of people that know how to develop and produce. They need more gold to crunch through and to produce more ore bodies. They're desperate. That's really that's the people that buy our product. What we sell are discoveries. We go out, we find something that nobody else knew, we evaluate it, prove it to their satisfaction, they buy it, and that's where we get a gain from zero, because it's just moose pasture, it's just grass, it's just you're a crazy dreamer, okay, up to that point, and nobody knows how to value you, okay? to suddenly that's real, and you've got a lot of it, tons times grade, okay, you just made a lot of money.
Let me interrupt you right there, because I know in some of your interviews that you've had before, you talked about the concept of peak gold. And if you could just give us a brief understanding of what is meant when people would talk about peak gold, and how can it be overcome?
Well, peak gold comes from the notion of peak oil or peak any kind of natural resource. It starts from the fundamental view that we exist on a planet. It's finite. It's so big. It's so dense. There's certain limited elements and commodities. So wait, how do you make an argument? We're running out of the stuff. We mine it. It's gone. It doesn't come back. So everyone wants to separate everything into renewable and non-renewable resources. Well, in reality, it drives me nuts, because that doesn't get us anywhere. Because I just went through a history of just specifically gold, where the Spanish came, they felt they had found all the gold that there was to find, and it was located in Central America and South America. And then a change in technology, they found more in the western U.S. Another change in technology led to a different kind of gold, from placer to lode gold. Okay, and then there was a plateau, and they got the same argument. Oh, we're running out of gold. Then they found some more. Okay, they've now produced more gold in Nevada than had ever been produced in California. Okay, and so it just continues to go. That's the reality. Okay, and so what happens is you want to focus on the changes in technology that continue to allow us to look for lower the costs of mining, lower the costs of discovery, to be able to mine gold in finer and finer concentrations and lower grades.
And in that, you are a game changer, because as you mentioned, nobody has to think very far back. When I was a kid, we traveled the southwestern U.S. and the southern U.S., and we went through Texas and we went through Oklahoma, and I saw thousands of oil wells that were pumping, and a lot of them that weren't. And I asked my mom and dad, why are those other ones not moving? And they said, well, the oil here has pretty much been tapped out. They pulled it all up and it's gone. And we grew up, we went through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, thinking the U.S. is kind of a seen better days. We no longer are a big oil producer. Now we have to import it because we don't make it anymore here. It's just not profitable. And then just in the last 10 years, North Dakota came along and whammo, everybody finds out that that's not the end of the story.
Oh, we've got more oil on this planet that we know now than we've ever had in the past. It was a Saudi Arabian that said, aren't you worried that we're going to, the oil age is going to end? And he just laughed and said, look, the oil age is going to end because we're running out of oil. You're going to pump it all out of the ground. We need to do something, trying to get everybody to be afraid. He just smiled and said, listen, the Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones. Okay? The oil age isn't going to end because we went out of oil. Okay? It's there. It's always going to be there. What we have to do is learn how to use it, and that gets us into the science involved in all these things.
So that's where you come in again as a game changer, because you and what you do is metaphorically changing those rusting oil derricks back into working again in the gold arena.
Totally. We have these visions of how it was in the past, where somebody came along and found some new, a new advance was made. The first person that found oil. Oh, boy, wouldn't you love to have been back there? Well, we'll never be able to recap, go back in time. We can never relive that moment. Nonsense. It's not about peak oil. It's about the opportunity to actually relive those incredible boom moments of rapid change and being in a position to benefit from that, to ride those waves, because that wave is rippling around this planet all through time and space. What is it we can learn about what has gone before to make us more efficient and better conservationists, better environmentalists, because we're learning more about how our planet operates and works. And that's where we come specifically to what it is that I've been doing, because what happened was I ran out of places to apply the current technology. Great track record, good story, Wade. You found gold. You can find gold. That's fine. Yeah, using the tools and looking at the places that were available at that time. Well, what are you going to do for me in the future? Was every year at every board meeting of the corporations that I worked for, no one cared about listening to your stories about what you did in the past. What they wanted to know was, what are you going to do for us in the future, and why should I believe you that it's going to work this time? And it doesn't make any difference. You do it over and over and over. People are still going to want to know, well, what about what's next? And I got to where it was very difficult to answer that question. In other words, to make a promise with any expectation that I was going to be able to keep it. Because we used in all of our tools. We had satellite imaging technology, all these things that people hear about, geophysics, geochemistry. Oh, boy, we had air photo, all sorts of things that we looked at. We looked everywhere, and we were clearly not finding as many gold deposits as before. Every year, as far as the accountants, the business managers were concerned, they said, well, do it again like you did. What you need now, people want to find more, so we're going to write bigger checks. You've got more money, so go out there and do it again. And they give us more money, and we'd come back and say, well, we spent it, but we didn't find anything. They go, oh, well, that's just bad luck. Okay, we'll go try it again. Give you some more money, okay? And we come back, didn't find anything. What's going on? And they would do that. They stayed with it. Investors are smart, good people. They stay with us, listening to these scientists talk year after year for 10 years. And every year we come back with less and less and less and less. And that produces a trend. And that's where we are now. Basically, that's what gives us concern about, well, maybe really we've done it all. Because we've spent a lot of money looking for it. We're not finding it, so why should we? Maybe we're done. We got to go find something else to do. And my point is look closer at these trends of supply, demand, and separate it into the two businesses. You can look at production. But production is starting to fall too. And it's falling because 10 years ago, discovery rates were falling. This is not magic. This is not complicated. You can go back to where did the discoveries have been falling for 10 years. So clearly production, because it takes time to turn a discovery into production, you end up with this gap. And that causes people that look at these things a great deal of problems. We think linearly. We don't look at, through time what's happening. And so what was the precursor before these? You can look at the kind of policies that the conservative economic principles, policies of Reagan, gave rise to what happened when Clinton took over, and he gets the credit because people just can't understand that it takes time for these good ideas to work themselves out. So if you're willing to do just a little bit more work, you're going to be, first of all, way ahead of everybody else that just sits out there and goes bumping along. And it's not that much more work to think about, where did this discover? Let's look at a graph of the discoveries. Oh, they've been following. Well, why have they been following? Even though we've been spending more money than ever. Since 2000, there's been more money than ever spent looking for gold, yet we haven't found it. And so that mismatch, people that focus on in the analytical community have talked about, wow, that's going on. Try to understand it. Well, that's peak gold. That's it. We're done. And so they like that because what it means is it's going to provide an environment where there's great demand and there's reducing supply, and it's going to put the price pressure on gold. And that's true. That's fine. That's supply and demand in the middle term. But it's also setting up a heck of an opportunity that, from my perspective, what's really happened is we can't find gold in Nevada. All you have to do now is look at Nevada, map of Nevada. This Mr. Hodges said it's got a lot of gold deposits, a lot of big ones per unit area. So it's a good place just to go in and place a bet. Okay, fine. Well, you look a little bit more. Where did the gold come from? It came from the exposed mountain ranges. Well, that makes sense. You can't find gold if you can't see the rocks, at least that the gold is associated with, to look for the clues. Well, then it doesn't take much more. You stop the globe spinning, look at a map of Nevada, you see the mountain ranges arranged in a funny pattern. They look like caterpillars marching north to south. And those mountain ranges are separated by flat areas in between. Those flat areas in between amount for about 60% of that entire area of the state of Nevada. So 60% of the area that produced the most gold in the smallest unit area of any place on the planet is covered by sand and gravel, and we can't see the rocks. Now, when you look at how those two things were formed, you realize the mountains were pushed up along fault zones. Mountains dropped down in between the mountains that then got covered by the erosional products, sand and gravel, to be covered, okay, and in these basins that we call them. Well, that process that created that topography we see today happened after all these gold deposits were formed. And so what that means is that there's good reason to believe that there's just as much gold as has already been found, okay, discovered in the exposed mountain ranges, but it's going to be concealed not in their mountains. It's going to be in their valleys, in the areas between the mountains that are covered by sand and gravel. And so the game gets focused now, very logically, very simply, to how is it possible, just imagine, is it possible to find the gold that sits underneath these gravels? Well, if you could figure out the answer to that, then you have the possibility of finding not just one or two gold mines, which are in themselves are amazing, but is it possible that technique could then be used like other techniques that were like the low-hanging fruit? A new technique comes along and they're suddenly amenable to finding lots of things really quick. So it's entirely possible that we're now positioned, if we can solve this problem of how you look underneath sand and gravel between these mountain ranges, we might well be able to find not one, but more than one. And that is definitely a eureka, I've discovered at moment, that is going to change the industry. It's a paradigm shift. And so for me, what's possible, not just for gold, because it also relates to, if you can find gold like that, could you find lead, zinc, silver? Could you find iron? I mean, what commodity lithium could you find with those kind of, what else is available? And so that brings us to, well, fine, okay, so tell us how you're going to look through sand and gravel. You can't look through sand and gravel. Well, very simply, what I see is that the other component of the sand and gravel, not just sand and gravel covering bedrock that has the gold in it, there's also a unique commodity there, a unique medium that you don't really find in the exposed mountain ranges. And that medium is groundwater. These basins between the mountain ranges are full of water that sits in the pore spaces of the sand and gravel. It occurs in layers and lenses, places where the sand and gravel, being particles, has open space between the particles. And that is the groundwater. That's how water sits in reservoirs beneath our feet. And you can drill a hole and you can pump the water out. Well, you realize that water, I love conversations with my environmental friends that trying to make the case that, Wade, surely you understand, for clean water, aren't you? You're clean for clean water. So, well, I understand, the question is clean water. It's important. We need to have clean water. And what are these things that we're doing to it? This environment is man that's messing their water up. I said, but the question isn't really, do we want, everybody wants clean water. Fine. But the point is, knowing something about groundwater is that there is no such thing as clean water, clean groundwater. H2O, pure H2O is more like an acid. It wants to have stuff in it. It dissolves things. Back to the beginning, as a chemist, these trace metals get dissolved in groundwater. The real question, more interesting question to me, is how much stuff is in that water? What levels can we tolerate, that are acceptable? And then what does it cost to adjust the chemistry of the groundwater? And that's a discussion that's much more interesting than, hey, I'm for clean water and, stop what you're doing. And then when you realize that the environmental community that has been very concerned now, got more and more concerned, it's not just about the quantity of groundwater, it's the quality. What is in this groundwater? Well, we've never, up until the late 90s, didn't really have the analytical technology to look at concentrations of trace metals in groundwater in parts per billion and in even parts per trillion levels. And that's now possible. And one of the unintended consequences of that environmental concern was for me to say, well, is it possible to analyze this volume of groundwater for the amount of gold it has in it? And further, is it possible to imagine that the amount of gold that's in that sample of groundwater is related to the gold, the ultimate source of that gold would be the bedrock, perhaps underneath the sand and gravel. And so right away, my curiosity speak. One, we've got a tool now that we can use to actually analyze groundwater samples consistently in very low quantities. And then two, I can apply it to places of my experience in Nevada of other known gold mines, and I can see that you bet, around known gold mines, you have groundwater that contains higher than normal concentrations of gold, and arsenic, antimony, mercury, all the other trace metals that gold deposits are associated with. And this makes sense because these gold deposits, the big ones that we're looking for right now, one of their unique characteristics is they have a lot of pyrite, false, fool's gold, pyrite, iron and sulfur. Okay, iron and sulfur, but that iron and sulfur, well, it's mostly iron and mostly sulfur, 1 part iron, 2 parts sulfur. Or the other way around. Anyway, you end up with minute amounts of gold, arsenic, antimony, mercury, other trace metals involved in that crystal structure, that the way that the iron and the sulfur hook together in the lattice of the crystal. And it's when you oxidize the pyrite, which is very easy to do because sulfur loves to be dissolved by water. It produces sulfuric acid, which produces mine drainage. And people are, vaguely familiar with that kind of stuff, the negative consequences of mining. And that sulfur, though, when it's oxidized by water, then releases the trace metals. They don't know where else to go. They're out floating around in a lower temperature environment. They generally end up eventually being adsorbed onto clays, zeolites. I mean, these are the components of water filters as it works its way through the ground, the soil.
So, in order to pull us back onto the timeline, then, if the water gives us a clues to where the gold lies, and you're able to discover what's in the water, telling you what else has been in the water, helping you give you clues to where the gold is, then it sounds like your new techniques that follow that new technological advancement are going to just really be breaking new ground, basically opening up new chapters in not only gold exploration, gold production, but also for all these other potentially life-changing and life-enhancing elements and resources that are going to be uncovered as well. I know you mentioned lithium is one possible, and its use in new battery storage technology, which is related to new solar futures, that sort of thing. So if people want to find out more about, because you are such a game changer that's going to be affecting potentially the entire industry, how can they find out more about your work specifically, and how, if they wanted to participate in it?
Well, clearly this is a long story. There's just no way we have enough time to go through all the details and for people to really come away with an understanding. I hope that this time has been spent to try to increase their curiosity, that it maybe hit some things that do make sense in their own lives, and to learn some more about this in more detail. You can go to our website, which is www.nevadaexploration.com. And on there's some presentations. The lower left of the homepage, you can click on presentations, and it gets you to some video clips that I've put together in an attempt to try to show in an animated way some of these things that I'm talking about. There's several of them. It takes it from the general overview down to more specific projects that we're working on. There's also the How the Earth Was Made, a History Channel production was made. Like I said, it was on for 2 years. The last episode of the second season was America's Gold. It was produced by a group of Earth scientists out of the United Kingdom. I thought it was excellent the way they ended it, because it is basically about the journey began with people exploring early on where you could find more gold, and we're still doing it today. And we're still breaking that new ground. It's just there's fewer people actually focused on actually breaking the new ground, understanding the technology involved to improve it. Most of our peers are more concerned about their cost of production. If you don't see gold in the rock, then they don't know what to do. They're not willing to take the risk to push back these sort of barriers. That's what we've been focused on. And we're now at a place where we can talk more about it. And I welcome people to come to develop a understanding of where we're at, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because it's a fun journey that we're on.
And if people want to participate in a real way, as far as participation in the potential growth of your enterprise, they can find out about that as well?
Well, certainly on the website you can learn about the financial aspects. We are publicly listed, and it is research and development that's being funded basically by the investment community, which is kind of unusual. And so it has certainly, it's got a lot of risk associated with what we're doing, because what we do is see the problems and then we look at solving them. And in the end, if we get paid, if this works, it will, in fact, be huge. There's no doubt about it. And so I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, want to encourage your people to just look over, see what the share price is, or put the symbol is and buy some based on this. You need to become involved in the process enough to understand what's going on. And in this very confusing, uncertain world, I don't think it's wise to listen to something that just sounds really good and bet the bank on it. There's so much uncertainty. The best way to handle that, final piece of advice to people listening, is to treat all these things as strategic options. You're placing an option, a bet. You put a small amount of money that you have to risk and something that really does sound like a good idea, then you wait to see the results, and you incrementally move forward. And you're in a position to really benefit at the early stage without bearing a complete, total loss, I think is the way to go. So please, encourage people to do their homework, because I think what you're going to find is the more you learn about this story, the more you will like it.
Well, Wade Hodges, CEO and Director of Nevada Exploration, we're just glad that you've joined us here again on Reluctant Preppers, and we'd like to have you back to talk a little bit about how as you are able to convert some of these discoveries that you've amassed. You mentioned that you're entering a whole new phase, in that up to now it's been somewhat more private in amassing and kind of building up this portfolio of discoveries, but now you're going to be turning a corner to where you're going to be actually able to allow some of these to go forward, and it'd be really interesting to hear some of the how that plays out as they start developing some of these.
Well, the final thought here is that yes, if this is so good, Mr. Hodges, it sounds too good to be true. Why aren't your peers doing this, and why are you the only one? And what's that about? And basically, when I saw what it was I was seeing, based on the experience that I've had and the success I've had, I just assumed that my peers would also be following along, doing exactly the same thing, because that was how exciting what I was seeing was all about. And so I went very quiet. There's no way in the world, that I want to be known for the person that came up with a good idea and found one gold deposit, and thank you, Wade, for showing the rest of the world how to do this. Now we're going to apply it everywhere. I mean, part of what I want to do is make sure that the early shareholders and investors, the believers in what we're doing, get a fair value for what it is that we're finding. And so there's no way I can predict exactly which gold in groundwater anomaly is going to lead to an economic gold deposit. So what we want to do is amass a number of these, as many of these as possible, to have control over before the competition starts coming to do the same thing. And that's why I'm now able to be relatively quiet, but now being able in a position to where we can talk more about it and share it, to give an opportunity to other people to come and basically come on in. The water's fine. Join the party.
Well, it's going to be an exciting chapter, because from everything it sounds like it's breaking open a whole new frontier here, and it could be issuing in a whole new gold boom. So we're going to stay closely attuned, and I think that's true for a lot of our listeners who are keenly interested in following the major trends in supply and demand and how it affects the gold market. So thank you, Wade, for being here on Reluctant Preppers.
Absolutely, done again. Look forward to talking again.